All right, so, okay, recording in progress. So, hey, everybody, my name is Visan Sorin. I'm an Automation Hub product manager, and today we will talk about large-scale rollouts and how to handle them in Automation Hub. And uh, today we will try to answer the question, how do I configure Automation Hub to ensure it's ready to be rolled out to my organization, regardless of the organization type, right? We'll have a couple of topics that will help you in making the best decision for your rollout. We will look at the difference between using Automation Hub on a single tenant versus on multiple tenants. Then we'll have a deep dive into how to map different personas to our roles and permission system. And lastly, we'll have a look at how to use groups and Azure Active Directory or SAML integrated groups into Automation Hub for an easier access management. Of course, we'll have a Q&A at the end. And feel free to post your questions also in the chat. So, starting with actually first starting with the safe harbor, which you'll see at all our webinars. We will the sentences and everything that you see here is confidential, and of course, like we will use estimates and anticipations that we will try to keep. But of course, if that doesn't happen, you'll see in the safe harbor. So starting first with choosing between single or multi-tenancy. So Automation Hub since last year in February has turned from a single tenancy model to a multi-tenancy model, which means that before we had only one single tenant, and it was if you got the product, you would be able to configure it only for one single entity. Since last year, since we onboarded into Automation Cloud, we enabled multi-tenancy. And that basically means that you're just leveraging the Automation Cloud tenants, and you can have Automation Hub services on those tenants. Now, let's see what are the differences in terms of configuration, and where do we recommend in terms of best practices to use multi-tenancy versus single tenancy. And you'll see here that it's a difference. We said multi-tenancy versus role per category, because in each situation, regardless if you want to use multi-tenancy or a single tenant, you or actually most of our customers wanted their users to have a separation in terms of views, meaning that you want your users to see exactly what they need in on what is of interest to them. For example, if they're in finance, they want to see only finance, and so on. Now, starting with multi-tenancy, since it's the newest model. On the multi-tenancy, the setup means that you have an automation cloud organization, and you have two tenants. Imagine here that you can have two tenants, one for each OpCo or one for each country. The advantages of having two separate tenants, as you'll see below here, is that you can have separate settings, separate configuration, and a total separation of the database and users between these two tenants. They're basically two separate entities altogether. And inside them, you as I mentioned earlier, besides the settings, you can have different users. You can have a totally different automation pipeline, different category setup, and everything in relation to the configuration of Automation Hub, right? So in terms of how it looks like in terms of the setup, this is what two separate tenants mean. It also means on the automation cloud level that you can go even forward with this separation and separated using separated on geographic level, meaning that you can have tenant one in a certain region and tenant two in another region, one in Europe and one in the US, if you want your entities to be completely split up also in terms of data residency, right? Um, and turning a bit to the model where you have roles per category, where you have one single tenant. Now, the single tenant um, um, it starts basically from the same spot. You have like an automation cloud organization, but you have automation hub on one single tenant. Let's say you put it on your prod tenant, where you have also your orchestrator cloud and document understanding and all other services. And you put it on that tenant because you will use only one single instance of automation hub. You'll have one set of settings and configuration, one set of users, one automation pipeline that you can manage. Now you'll ask, okay, but how will my users still be able to be separated in terms of what they view and what they can do? Now that is achieved using our roles and permission system, because you can have your finance users be set up to see only finance automations and ideas. Same for the legal users. So using our permission system, as I'll show you in a short demo, you'll be able to do this. So you'll achieve this separation of users, and in the same time, in terms of the automation pipeline, you will be able to have a central view of everything, right? Because for the COE, one of the most important things is exactly this: to be able to have a central view of absolutely everything in the automation pipeline, so you can manage all the automations, all the ideas, have reporting on it, and so on. There's two before we switch to the two scenarios, and I will show you also a small demo. Let's see where we see these two scenarios apply. Now, multi-tenancy is something that we recommend to customers that, first of all, want the full separation of data, as I mentioned before, or a geo-separation of data into different regions, right? So a good example of this is when you have an entity in the US and one in Europe, and you want them completely separated. We also recommended when you think that the business unit is mature enough to have their own COE. So a COE that's mature enough that can handle their own automations and doesn't have to rely on another central COE for an extra approval layer. Now, the fine-grained permissions, or the single tenancy, is recommended when the COE is centrally located and is related to what I mentioned earlier, when the COE expresses the need to have an overview on reporting for the entire company, to help them manage easier manage their automation pipeline. Right. It also can work for a distributed COE who wants to maintain a consistent way of assessing and managing the pipeline. And I'll actually show you how both of these look in an example. Now, um, the differences between these two scenarios are pretty clear, right? In terms of what you have to do for using your automation hub on one tenant, of course, you need to start by setting up the categories. And one trick that we saw here with a lot of customers is you want to set up categories on separate departments, business units, but you may want to use another level that will define the OPCO or the country. Because if you have, for example, finance and accounting, but you have the finance and accounting in Europe, and there's a different finance and accounting also in the US, you may want your first level to be US or Europe to define that, and then the second level of category to define the actual business unit. right? So that's one trick, having the first level, the opco or the country. We've seen also other examples where the opco is one of the last levels of the hierarchy. But that depends a lot on your existing setup as well. If you have an existing setup and you want to move to this setup with the first level as the opco, we have ways of updating the categories using the Open API or using the existing CSV options in the platform. Next, we want to look at how to associate users with roles and categories, because in the end, you want to obtain that separation of use in terms of what the user views, right? And we're talking about users, we're talking also about groups. Of course, you want to set up the cost catalog, but in this, in order to use the cost benefit analysis section, but in this time, you will need to think of a way to set up that cost catalog for all the opcos. So it has to apply for everybody because you have one global tenant. But then again, the main benefit of having one global tenant is that you obtain visibility across all opcos. You can have a central COE or even a distributed COE that when you get into the automation pipeline, you will be able to have visibility across absolutely everything, and you'll also be able to extend that in terms of reporting using the Insights integration. Now, on the multiple tenants, basically the steps that you need to do are the same. You need to set up your users, your groups, your categories. But the difference is that in terms of reporting, you will need to report per tenant. You won't have visibility across the two tenants unless you're an admin and you can access each one of them. And when there's no concept, as we heard from a lot of times, there's no concept of having let's say a global view, right? So getting information from both of these tenants into a global view. Of course, probably technically you can do that using the API, but there's nothing out of the box in the UI that allows you to have this reporting, right? So as I mentioned in the beginning, this option is recommended when you have individual COEs or individual countries that want to have absolutely different configurations on each of their tenants. And it's important for some aspects. For example, if you have different costs that you want to define in the cost setup, you'll be able to do that much easier while having this separation. It's also important when it comes to separating in terms of geos and countries. Now, I will pause a bit and I will go to a bit of demo. Let me just find it here. So first we'll see a single tenant org, and then we'll move to a multi-tenant org, and I'll show you on both of these what are some of the items that we discussed before in the presentation. So when we're talking about the single tenant org, it basically means in terms of configuration that you have one automation cloud account and you have automation hub enabled on one of the tenants, right? So let's say right, I have this organization which is called single tenant org, and I have all these services in here, including automation hub. My tenant, I named it global. Let me just log in again. I named it global because I wanted to reflect that this is where I keep absolutely everything in terms of users, in terms of automation pipeline, and so on. And I'm just gonna take a quick peek at the manage access, and I'm going to focus on the groups. We're going to talk about the groups a bit later. but you can manage your all of your users into one single one single tenant in here. You can manage also your groups into one single instance, and the way you will kind of you want this to work in terms of separation is actually something that you will probably start from the platform setup categories. Here, you'll see that what I did in this tenant is actually started from the opco. In my case, it was the opco country, where I started with Europe, and then I had like finance and accounting. I had basically all my category hierarchy that I had before on the next levels of the category system. So I kept the first one for the country. I have the same for the US, and then I kept the other ones for the rest of the levels for the other for the business area part. Right. So once you do this, you'll be able to use what you defined in here as categories to separate the business users and say that, okay, I want my business users from Europe to only see the ideas that are submitted from Europe. And maybe I want to have a global view. So I want to I want them to see everything, but then I want them to just to be able to submit ideas on a certain business area. Right, so this can be done using this separation using the categories. You can also go, and this is an example, you can also go as granular as the assessments, which we have a next webinar coming, which my colleague Theo will present, where you can separate and say, I want for the US, for my US users to have a separate assessment, which means that when somebody submits an idea and they select US as the category, they'll be able to see a different assessment. You can go, you can do the same for Europe, and you can even go as granular as the finance and accounting, right? Now, moving over to a multi-tenancy, right? So a multi-tenancy system basically allows you on the same automation cloud account to have two separate tenants, and you have the automation hub service on enabled on each one of them. And in my case, I have Europe opco and also a US opco. And it's something that I did in terms of the groups, right? Because in here, when even if you have like tenant separation, you will still have on automation cloud level, you will still have a view which the admin can see, where you can basically see the users from all the tenants. So this is only the admin can see that. And what I did here is actually defined a couple of groups besides the default ones from Automation Cloud for EU, COE, RPA devs, and also some generic groups that we use for everybody. Now, if I go to if I go to Automation Hub, and let's look first at the EU opco. So in my EU opco, what I did at the manage access groups level is that I associated everybody from EU opco all to a standard user. I wanted the EU COE to have a COE COE user role, and I wanted my RPA devs to be unauthorized user, sorry, and I wanted my RPA devs to be an idea approver and an RPA developer, right? So I can do the same for the US, but the main idea here is that even if you have a central spot in Automation Cloud where you can manage all the users and you can use the same basically also in your Active Directory, inside Automation Hub, since you have the separation between tenants, you'll be able to add the specific groups corresponded to your opco or to your region, and manage them easier by just associating them with roles from Automation Hub. Right. So this is an example of of multi-tenancy, where we have two opcos, U and US, totally separated with totally different configurations and users, right? And with a total separation, including in terms of geo, because that's something that we mentioned at the beginning, and I think it's really important. So in my case, we have the EU opco, which is on the Europe region, and I can keep my US in my United States region, right? Having that said, I think we can move back to the presentation, and we want to deep dive a bit and see how we if we after we decided how do we want to have our tenancy, if we want to go for a single tenant or a multi-tenant. Let's see on how let's see how we map different personas to specific platform permissions and user roles, right? And before we get into the scenarios, let's have a look at some user personas examples. And these are the personas that we use when in UiPath. And that will apply to these scenarios. And we'll start with the head of COE, right? The COE director, automation champion, right? We have Beth, and we have also like Satya, who's an RPA developer, Victoria as a business analyst, Mihaela as a technical project manager. All of these are personas that, regardless of the COE, of how large a COE is, you will find them in there. There are useful, they help build together the COE. Of course, we can extend that to have Lily as a business user, Alejandra as a citizen developer or business automation pioneer, and we can also have stakeholders like Jackson or Bobby as an operation manager or process controller, right? All of these we will use and associate with our automation hub role types. And in here, we have two types of roles in Automation Hub that are really important to understand before we get to the scenarios. So we have what we call roles, which are the ones that basically give you access to different sections and functionalities from the Automation Hub website. And we have here like the system admin, component curator, program manager. You'll see them used in our scenarios. In the same time, we have collaborator roles. Now, these collaborator roles, when we assign them, they are associated to a specific automation idea profile page, right? So it gives the user that are assigned where we assign them specific editing rights to that profile page. Right, so some examples here are, for example, the project manager, COE idea submitter, citizen developer, process mining, and so on. Now, based on the persona types and the role types from Automation Hub, we have certain scenarios that we want to look at, right? Now, the permissions the permissions and the roles sometimes are harder to understand. That's why we kind of had these scenarios all lined up for different type of companies and rollouts. The first one is an RPA Starter, where you you can have, for example, the head of RPA, the COE lead, Beth, right? Which is in charge of handling all activities. So we will recommend to have the system admin, program manager, and component curator role. It's a lot of hats for an RPA COE lead, but in the same time, we're talking about a small COE, right? That has this setup. In the same time, we have like a business analyst, right? The business analyst, which will pick up the role of an authorized user. But again, since it's a small COE, it could also be it will also have the collaborator roles of business analyst and project manager, because you you will expect a business analyst, especially in a small COE, to pick up also the tasks that are somehow outside of their area. So not only the PDDs and evaluating the asses and to be processed, but also project management tasks like moving the automation forward and so on. Then the RPA developer, which is essential, right? We want it as a role to be a standard user, but as a collaborator role, evidently we will have it as an RPA developer, but also a project manager, because in a small COE, an RPA developer can wear many hats, and it can also help you bring the move the automation forward in the life cycle, right? And it can have also other collaborator roles as needed. The ones that are marked in gray represent the COE, while the other ones are personas outside of the COE, right? But that can also apply to a RPA starters scenario, like the RPA champions, right? You want your RPA champions that are, let's say, very acquainted with RPA, but are not actually part of the COE, but they're experts on some of the areas in the company. You want them to be standard users so they can submit ideas, and they'll also receive a submitter by default when they're submitting ideas. We have the SMEs, the subject matter experts, where again, you want them as standard user, but they'll also be process owners, because they will have the best knowledge to complete the detailed assessment with all the necessary data before the automation is moved forward into the qualification phases. Of course, you have the end business user, and this is depending on the way you want to roll out. If you're talking about the small COE, maybe you won't want to do crowdsourcing even from the beginning, right? But maybe you want to you just want the COE to handle all the automation pipeline, and not have the business user necessarily submitting ideas. But maybe you want to extend this model of crowdsourcing in the future, case in which you can add an end business user that will be available, that will be responsible to submit ideas. Hence, you will get the submitter collaborator role, and also have a standard user, so it can view absolutely everything so you can view other ideas from the pipeline. So from scenario one, we can move to a more mature RPA program. So scenario two, right? So when we have like a large COE, right? So for a large COE, you'll see that some of the roles actually are repeated, and they're recommended in each scenario. But for example, in this one, the head of COE has slightly less responsibilities, right? Because when you have a mature COE, can have the COE lead having the roles of system admin and program manager, but you can have an implementation manager, right, which can also have the program manager role and can cover some of the tasks from the COE lead, right? The implementation manager can also be a standard user, so it can also be responsible for submitting ideas, and it can also have collaborator roles as project manager to move their ideas forward. The business analyst, again, will have the authorized user role in order to submit COE ideas directly after they have, for example, workshops where they analyze the process, and they already know all the details of the process. They don't have to submit a normal idea. They can just submit the COE idea, and then they can have the collaborator role as a business analyst on different type of ideas. You'll probably have a professional RPA developer well, we want it to be like a standard user and also an RPA developer as a collaborator role, one or more, of course, because we're talking about a large COE, so it's not only one persona involved in here. Since again, your COE is larger, you probably want also a solution architect, which by default can be a standard user, but also a component curator, because you want him to look at the libraries that are created, at the reusable components that you have in the platform, and that will help build the larger automations in your pipeline, right? As collaborator roles, you'll see them as a solution architect and as an RPA developer. Of course, again, outside of the COE, now you can have also the citizen developers. So a citizen developer that will have a role of standard user, but can have the collaborator roles of citizen developer, process owner if needed, and will be responsible for developing for submitting citizen developer automations, for example, and also developing them, right? You'll have again the set of RPA champions, which will act as standard users and submitters, subject matter experts as well, and business users. When you were talking about large COE, now we can definitely recommend crowdsourcing, right? Because your intake of ideas can definitely get better if you have a lot of users submitting an ideas, and you have the COE and automation champions reviewing them, and then having a consolidated pipeline to automate inside your company. Of course, we have also the scenario of working with partners, right, which are extremely in terms of setup. You'll see that it's pretty pretty similar to the large COE, but the difference here is that you can have the partner itself act as different personas directly within Automation Hub. You can have them as an implementation manager, you can have them as business analyst or an RPA developer. And we got this question a lot, that if it's recommended to allow the implementation partner in Automation Hub, and the answer is yes, because they can help to manage the pipeline, to take on some tasks, for example, that are normally associated to the head of COE, and overall in terms of managing the process. If you have like a business analyst, it will help speed up the automation process altogether, if they are directly in Automation Hub, right? Outside of the COE, of course, you can have RPA champions, subject matter experts, and business users with the same setup as you saw before. But the main focus here is on what the partners can actually pick up from these personas. Now, before we move forward, let's have a look also at um, a quick pick on this setup. Let me just find it, because we have here prepared a setup for RPA Starter and a mature RPA program, right? And I'll just show you what I did in terms of assigning roles and permissions, right? So exactly the setup that you saw before, right? Like the for an RPA Starter, you can see it here directly live in Automation Hub. So we have, just as an example, we have Beth, which is an RPA COE director, and you can see here that we have 3 roles for her: system admin, program manager, and component curator. A lot of hats since it's a small COE. We also have a business analyst, an RPA developer, and an operations manager, right? For example, the business analyst has an authorized user, business analyst, and project manager role associated with her. right? So of course we have also like business owners and PO analysts. We have also the business users. So this is the example where we have all the personas in. But this is one example of how to get this setup done, right? And if we move forward to the mature APA program, which we have it in a separate tenant in here, you'll see that in terms of role association, right, we have the RPA developers, the business analyst, and we also have, for example, the solution architect, which picks up a standard user, component creator, solution architect, and RPA developer role. And of course, these are all generic, right, in my example, but they can be easily associated with a specific category, right? So now they're generic on all business areas, but they can be associated with finance and accounting, or any other business area that you have defined in Automation Hub. Right. So having this in mind, we saw how to pick between multi-tenancy and single tenancy, how to map different personas to the roles in Automation Hub. Let's get back to the presentation and see also how to manage users and groups. And here we will look also at how to manage users from Automation Cloud and also Azure Active Directory. Right. So the main thing that we want to emphasize here is that Automation Cloud, right, the integration between Automation Hub and the Automation Cloud allows you to go as granular as you want in terms of group management, right? Means that an Automation Cloud org admin can create a group in Automation Cloud, right? And that group can contain members from the local directory and also from the Azure Active Directory, right? So you can have a separation directly in here, right, where you can add you can already have a group. Let's say you have like business users for a certain opco. You can define that at the Automation Cloud group level, and then you can have group members from that opco, which are local users, or you can have them from Azure Active Directory. Same you can do for like other departments and so on. Now, what happens between Automation Cloud and the Automation Hub is that we actually import that group. We reference it in Automation Hub, and we sync the group members, which means that if that Automation Cloud group gets imported into Automation Hub, then all the users in there, including the local users or the ones from AD, will have access to Automation Hub, right? The advantage is that in Automation Hub, you'll be able to go even more granular and say that those the users from that group can be associated to specific roles or collaborator roles, right? And even further than that, the collaborator role can or the roles can be associated to categories and business areas. And to make this even clearer, we have an example in here where let's say the group that you're creating is called finance. We create a finance group in Automation Cloud. You add members from local users or from AAD, from the AAD, for example. You can add the finance group directly. And afterwards, you import the group in Automation Hub. That means that you'll be able to associate it with different roles and different categories. So let's say you want to have the finance group associated with the standard user on no category selected, which means that it's is basically on all categories. This means that everybody from finance will be able to view all the ideas in Automation Hub and to also submit ideas in Automation Hub. on any category. The second role that you will have for your finance group is the idea approval role, which will be applied on specifically on finance and accounting. So we will want everybody from finance to be idea approvers only on the ideas submitted on the finance and accounting category. Right. So this is one small example where where the groups can be leveraged. The groups from Azure Active Directory can be leveraged in Automation Hub. Now, if we go back, for example, to let me see. If we go back, for example, into here, into this single tenant global org. Actually, no. Let's. Yeah, let me use these examples with the EU opcodes and the US opcodes, right? So for these ones, as I showed you also earlier, I created separate groups for everybody in each opcode, right? So I had one for the COE, for the RPA devs, all and so on. Yeah. Now in these groups, for example, in this one, I don't have everybody, just anybody's just a placeholder, but I can add for example, my colleague Julia, and if I had an Azure Active Directory connection, I can add also somebody from a group from Azure Active Directory. Actually, let me just show you that in a different tenant right here. One was it? Yeah, this one. So in this one, I want to go to admin, and I want to show you how to actually create that finance group with an Azure Active Directory connection. So this tenant that I'm using has an Azure Active Directory connection, which means that I can go here in groups, and you can see that I have all defined as a group. Now by default, everybody that gets access to Automation Cloud automatically is added to the everyone group, right? But you can have a different group if you want to if you want to have like a I don't know, if you want to extend that to like even other users from the organization. Now, if I want to add, for example, my finance group in here, I can easily select the users from finance, like the finance group from Azure Active Directory will show up in here, and I can also select individually some of my other colleagues like Anya, for example, and Yulia. So I can have a combination of users and groups into this finance group, right? So at this point, everything is saved on the Automation Cloud level, and I can go forward on the Automation Hub level and say that, hey, I want in my mature RPA program, right, in terms of groups, to associate the finance group I already have associated as a standard user, as you can see here, right? So that means that Yulia, Anya, and everybody from the finance group in Azure Active Directory is a standard user on finance and accounting, right? I have a separate group, which is called the RPA CoE, which is an authorized user on all categories, right? Which means that which means that they will be able to submit COE ideas on all categories, everybody from the finance group. Now, in terms of management, using the groups layer is extremely important, because you will be able to easily manage everybody from the organization, meaning that if the group if the Azure Active Directory group, for example, is updated and somebody from finance is not in finance anymore, or somebody new joins the finance group, they will automatically be granted access to Automation Hub, because the connection we have in here is with the Azure Active Directory, with the Azure Active Directory group, which means that the users will remain in sync, right? So the users who are not in finance anymore will lose access. The user who will be added to the finance group will gain access, right? So in terms of management, the only thing that you need to do is decide on how granular you want to go in terms of group management. Now, the example that I showed you here with the finance group is by just adding by just adding the group from Automation Cloud, but you can very easily add the group, the Azure Active Directory group directly in Automation Hub. So you can bypass and not have to create a group in Automation Cloud first. You can just create a group, just use the group from Azure Active Directory in here in Automation Hub, and map it, for example, as let's say standard user on sales and marketing, right? So we have the sales group mapped as a standard user on sales and marketing. Good. And to finish up, because I want to have some more remaining, to spend some time also on Q&A. To finish up, let's look also at some useful recommendation in using Azure Active Directory, and not only Azure Active Directory. I said that in a lot of instances, but when we talk about connection to the AD, we can have Azure Active Directory, but we can have also the SAML integration, which extends that to also other identity providers. And so both of them are available. They both have almost the same options in terms of group management, and they have the same goal to make user management easier for you. Now, some of the recommendations that that we have here will help you to have to better manage this the connection to the AAD and the connection with your users in general. So, for example, you want to look at using AAD existing groups to define only the business user at each category level. And this is something that I showed you in the last part of the demo, when I associated the sales group to a standard user on the sales category, right? You can do that at the group level, and you can associate permissions and go as forward as the business area to define those groups. Now, if you're talking about large organizations with a lot of opcos, right, and you have to do this setup for basically every opco in the company. Now, that will take some time to associate each and every group to a permission from Automation Hub on the specific opco, on the specific category, right? But remember that this is a one-time thing. You set it up once, and then it just works. It syncs automatically. You don't have to redo it again, unless, of course, the opco changes and the group in Azure Active Directory changes. For other roles, like for example, for ID approver, you can have also an assignment on user level, right? So when we have the option to use the existing API. You can add the user directly using the API, and you can maintain it using the API, and not have to necessarily use the Azure Active Directory connection in this case, right? In the same time, when you use if you want an even granular approach, right, you can use the automation cloud groups instead of AAD groups. So the ones that I showed you in my one of my first examples, right, when you create the group first on automation cloud level and then and not use the AAD group directly in automation hub, because that gives you the option to add extra users in there. So imagine that you want to have you define a finance group and you add everybody from finance, but maybe you want also the head of RPA to be in that specific group, right? You don't need to modify your AAD group. You can just add it at the automation cloud level, and that's it. Besides the finance group from AAD. Last but not least, you can use the Open API to get a solid report around the user assignment. You can all the users that are that have logged in into Automation Hub, even if they're added from Azure Active Directory groups, will be able to will have an entry in the user menu in Automation Hub, which means that you can use the get users to see all their role assignment and after that you can manage it using the API or the existing capabilities that we have in the platform. Yeah, before we switch to the Q&A, I just want to remind you that we have a couple of next webinars that my colleagues and Julia will present. The next one is on using Drake APIs to build a strong business case. When Walter will show you how to collect the right information and compute the right KPIs, the relevant KPIs for the decision-making progress. This is on August 9th. And we have session 4 on August 23rd, where Julia will show you how to use the integration with Insights, where we'll deep dive on the out-of-the-box dashboard templates and basically everything that you can do in terms of reporting with Insights, with integration with Automation Hub. I know there's only 5 minutes remaining, and I probably have a lot of questions. Let's see.
Well, so I answered most of the questions on the chat, and maybe it's worth saying to everyone that the questions will be available in the deck as well with the answers. But I did select, like 3 questions which are pretty interesting, and maybe you want to reiterate on those. Of course, unless someone else wants to unmute and ask additional questions, we're more than happy to hear them live. For instance, there was one interesting question from Faiz around whether we can copy ideas between tenants. I mentioned about the different configuration and the incompatibility between configurations in the tenants, but I also mentioned about the Open API layer. So do you want to maybe talk from your experience of customers who wanted to copy ideas from one tenant to another?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and especially on the multi-tenancy aspect, we had these requests in the past. So technically, it is possible using the Open API layer, but you will need to be careful on certain aspects of the source tenant and and of the destination tenant. The destination tenant will have to first get all the configuration from the source tenant, meaning in terms of categories, in terms of applications, cost setup, absolutely everything in terms of configuration before the actual ideas are moved. The way we can move the ideas from one tenant to another is basically using the API. We have a set of APIs that we can use. We even launched some in the 22.4 release, which I think that can be used for this use case. And the APIs basically need, in terms of for an idea to be submitted, they will need IDs, for example, for the categories, for the applications, and so on. So after you move all the configurations, so you recreate all the configuration in the destination tenant, and again, we have APIs to, for example, get all the categories and put them into the destination tenant, or you can use the CSV for that. After all that is done, you need to fetch all of this data, meaning the category IDs, the application IDs, and the question IDs, and so on. And then you will be able to submit the ideas into the destination tenant. It's not a straightforward process. It has been done before using the API layer, but it takes a lot of tedious work.
Thank you for the deep dive in the answer. Then there was another interesting question from Jolt. He was talking about a scenario where he has more than 180 groups that he first needs to map into Automation Cloud groups and then come back to Automation Hub and use those Automation Cloud groups to basically map to specific roles in the service, which sounds a bit cumbersome. And he's asking for a more effective way of achieving that. I know you highlighted in the best practices, like the last slide, the part where you do it one time, it's tedious maybe, but you're doing it just one time. Still, any ideas about how do we handle this scenario with 100 groups that need to be mapped?
Yeah, I was looking also at your response, and I think like, yeah, you can map them directly on the Automation Hub level. If you map them to Automation Cloud, it's only for the scenario where you want to add also some extra groups in there or some extra users in there. And then, yeah, maybe it's an idea to have a look at the setup. Maybe you don't need all those groups. Maybe you're looking too granular, and you can have less groups and go even. Maybe you're going too granular in terms of separating the views into categories. Maybe you want to go at everybody from finance or everybody from legal instead of having somebody from accounts payable and so on being that separated. These are the questions that you need to look into before deciding on this, like of managing all these 100 groups, and we can deep dive Jolt also separately.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, I don't know if people had other questions that maybe want to express live. I had only one last question I wanted to highlight maybe. But again, if people want to share a question live, we encourage you to do it. There was one question, it was sent in a direct message. I'm not going to say the name of the person who asked, but it was related to a partner that has a BPO license. And the partner was interested in whether he can use the multi-tenancy to basically bring different customers on the same license. I express my point of view on what is the best recommendation, depending whether you want to engage with users from the client side in the Automation Hub service. And the recommendation is basically to use separate Automation Cloud works, which means separate licenses. But Sorin, do you have any additional insights from your experience with partners and how they handle the BPO scenario?
No, definitely we want to use separate organizations, and the main reason for that is that you saw also in the demo, there's one place in Automation Cloud where you can see basically everybody, and that everybody could represent everybody from different companies, which is a scenario that we want to avoid. Yeah, we saw in practice also other example of partners that have like different organizations for the customers that they manage. It's the safest and easiest approach from our perspective.
Okay, one last chance to ask for questions. If not, I think you have our LinkedIns and you can also reach out. And yeah, the email address on which you can also send emails, and we're more than happy to answer those questions. So I'll let Sorin and Christina do the closing part.
No, thank you all. Thank you, Julia. Thank you so very much, Sorin, for a very nice session. I think everyone got their answers, and there was a huge amount of interaction in the chat. So thank you, Julia, for that effort to support all the answers in the chat. And we're closing. You will find the recording and the presentation tomorrow on the event registration link. So the same registration link where you started, you will find the recording and the deck there tomorrow. Thank you all for joining. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.